Welcome to another episode of Rennch. This time Michael is going to be finishing off the front end on the 911S Blasphemy Build. It's going to be cracking.
Before I get started, two things. Number one, if you are in the UK, or if you have a Porsche magazine affliction like the rest of us do, I have a huge thrill to report in that my Grey Ghost, my first Porsche build, is just featured in this month's issue of Total 911. Look, there it is, right on the cover. And then I have a huge feature story. So there's me, look at that, right there in the magazine. Huge thrill, a huge thrill for me. Also, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Hit that look-a-douche, and then hit the little notification. And then when I do this, it goes kadoosh, and then you have this there. So I'm an idiot. Let's talk about why I'm an idiot. Last episode, you'll see that I tried fairly successfully to place the front latch panel, but there's nothing touching it. So I had to position it kind of in 3D space so I could get the thing affixed to the car and get the entire front end on. And I went back and forth between the Blasphemy Build and the Grey Ghost, which is right here next to me, like 50 times. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, including the one time where my little hood holder upper, I hit it and the hood went wha-bow, and it hit me on the back of the head and I bled all over the place. That happened in the last video. Here's the problem. I went back and forth to measure all of the exact measurements to put the front latch panel. And it's a huge pain in the ass because you have to level things, you know what everything is. Here's why I'm the idiot. Months ago, I printed this at Kinko's, and yes, it's still Kinko's. Notice the front end with all the dimensions I need to measure from, and I forgot all about it. I totally forgot I even had the thing. So I came back out here today and was like, oh wait, why don't I use the thing that I made to check my dimensions? And thankfully, it's in the ballpark. It's like 5 mil off, but not, it's really pretty close. Enough that this is what the front end looks like at the moment. I had a few extra parts just from having long hoods for the last 15 years. So I put on some horn grills, I put on some turn signal lenses, I put on some headlight rings, and then I jacked the front bumper into place with all of that together, and look how good it looks. It looks like an actual front end of a Porsche 911. So right now the latch is a little stuck. I'm gonna get it unstuck, but I think I'm really close to being able to start to create some cardboard templates and cut those sucker out of metal and weld the thing on and be finished with this front latch panel. So let's get into that. Let's see how far we get. Maybe I get the whole thing done today and we high five and the car is essentially back together in stock form. So for the next few videos, I get to play with cool stuff. The first number I'm going to focus on here is this one, the 679 millimeters. And that goes from this lip, which is right here, this lip on the inside, to the center of this fender hole, which is the one that's basically right here. It's that one. And I have an idea that I'm going to try to explore. I don't know if it's going to work, but I'll show you guys what I have in mind. What I've done here is I've picked up some rope, and if you ever use, it's kind of nylon rope, I got it at Harbor Freight. If you guys ever cut this stuff, top tip is that you've got to kind of cauterize it. So you got to seal the end up by burning it, otherwise it'll fray. So you can do that with pretty much any nylon rope. So I'm going to do each end, and I'll show you what I'm going to do with this stuff. In theory, the measurement is between, it's at that lug hole, but it's right in the middle. So what I thought I would do is loop this rope through the holes, make it taut, and then it'll give me something to measure from dead center. Make sense? are looking for 679 millimeters to this center from about the middle of this. 679. I mean, it looks like a full inch. It looks like I'm a full inch too far forward. That doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense, though. I've made some adjustments and re-welded these two sides. So now I know they're dead even on each end and they match the other car. Now I have a really nice smooth fit to the hood, which is great. Make the noise. So it turns out my instincts were correct, and I did end up having to use that car for measurements. I also discovered this. Once I measured correctly, this lip lines up almost perfectly with this seam underneath. So I think I'm in the right spot, as validated by the smoothness in which this hood closes and makes this thing a really nice front end. So now that the panel is correctly positioned, we get to do some fun fabrication. Now, I'm not a fabricator, but I was able to take this piece and turn it into this piece. As you can see, this extends the chassis where the weather stripping of the hood goes. And I'm going to show you how I made it with the use of an old brake rotor. Okay, so here's my piece, and I want to turn it into something that looks like this. So it's got a bend down and it's got a flange up. So I've got to do the same thing with this. First, I've got to prepare this piece for some fabrication. So the first thing I did is I put a bunch of X's because I know that that X's part, that's the part I don't want to modify. What I do need to modify is this lip. The first thing I'm going to do is make a mark where my flange needs to end. And to do that, I'm just going to use a set of calipers. I'm not sure if you've ever seen anybody use calipers like this before, but if you haven't, I'm just learning this myself. But basically, you take the caliper, you put it on the end like this, and then you can just pull down, and the sharp edge of the caliper scribes the line perfectly that you want to scribe. So now I have something I can follow. Once I'm scribed, I can just use a straight edge and mark a little Sharpie line. Like this, like that. So that is effectively the piece that I want to keep. Now the hard part of this is that I have to make this entire piece bend down this way, but there's this flange here. So to help facilitate better bending, I'm going to cut the flange. So I just cut some relief cuts just until I get to that flange. It's kind of cool, huh? Now my piece looks like this. This is where the brake rotor comes in. So first of all, brake rotors make a really good fabrication anvil because they have all kinds of cool surfaces. They're very hard, they've got great flat surfaces, they've got great curve, they've got compound curves. This one has this nice edge, and in fact, this is the one we're going to use for this particular project. So I'm going to put this piece on, and just to get it started, I'm going to finish it here, but just to get this thing started, I'm going to clamp it to this rotor and then start hammering down so I can just get some curvature into this panel. I'm literally going to just start Wear gloves when working with sharp metal. I can bend a lot of it. All right. Super rough, but now I've got a bent lip with a flange on it. So this is where I start using this bad boy. And what I know about is that this particular piece ends up being very close to the curve of this brake rotor. So I know that I just need to make this piece fit into this brake rotor. Let me give you guys a closer look as I shape it. It gives me a really nice sharp edge. Well guys, there we go. Before I trim it, it looks really good. They are literally almost identical. So all I have to do now is look at my scribe line with my Sharpie and then just cut that part off. You can see how much the metal has expanded by how much these things have separated. And now I'm just going to take my wheel, my cutting wheel, and cut these off. All right, I just cut off the lip, and this is what we've got. And that is how you make curved flanged pieces without anything but a brake rotor, a pair of vice grips, and a hammer. Here's the fit. It looks great. Now mind you, when I weld this thing up, I'm gonna have to manipulate it anyway. I'm gonna weld this leading edge, make sure the flange is totally dialed and centered, and then I'm gonna have to hammer and get the thing positioned correctly anyway. So these are by far close enough to do that with, and I'm gonna be done with them for now. Okay, from this perspective, you can see that this thing is really just hanging in 3D space. It's kind of leaning up against this, but it's actually not supposed to. But here's what I've done. I've pulled the fenders off, and I've welded little tabs right onto the body of the car. This thing is really good right now. Like it's centered, the hood closes well, and I'm feeling like it is where it needs to be. It might be a teeny couple of millimeters high on one side, but I think I can just take a BFH and fix that. Here's my plan. Now that I have this relatively affixed, it actually feels really stable here. I'm gonna take my custom fabricated rails and I'm gonna weld these onto this piece. And they are going to stay permanently on there. Once these are secure and welded, I will employ the use of cardboard aided design and start figuring out what kind of side panels I can make for this. Then I'm gonna have to cut this thing out and figure out how that all works. As you can see, I have a bunch of welding to do just to get the chassis back to full integrity before I start welding on the front panel pieces. I cut a lot of this stuff in previous videos just to get the chassis back to where it was supposed to be, and now I have to weld it all together. This is what the welds look like before I grind them down. Obviously, I'm not exactly laying dimes, but they are strong and they are penetrating the steel. It's been a day or two since I worked on the project, and while I was mulling this over, I closed the hood and I realized that I was about a ½ inch too low with the front latch panel. So as you can see from this picture, I can fit a whole finger in between where the thing is supposed to be and where it currently is. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take these pieces that I fabricated, I'm gonna weld these to the car, drill a couple of holes for spot welds, and move the panel up to meet them, then see where I am, and hopefully, if all goes well, I'll be able to cut and weld the bottom section of the front panel on as well. So here we are, I've got each piece now, each extension that I made is welded on, I've got it all burnished back, and as you can see, I've got about a finger width. I got some thick fingers, but I got a finger width that I have to raise this entire latch panel. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut this piece off and raise it up and clamp it, and effectively, this piece needs to stay straight. So I've drilled some spot weld holes that I can use to weld onto this piece. So ultimately, the end of this goes inside this little slot, and there's a little bit of space here that I can fill in, but then this thing gets spot welded to this piece at the right level, and we should be good to go. All right, so this is pretty exciting. Now that I have this bottom part trimmed, you can start to see the mouth kind of shaping around the piece, which is really cool. The vertical looks really good. So what I don't know yet is how the hood closes, which I can't do while these clamps are on. So I gotta figure that out. I've gotta keep this thing clamped in place. I may just put a little tack weld in the corner, each one of these corners, just to keep the thing in place, and then put the hood on. I also need to put the fenders on and make sure everything just aligns before I weld. And then of course, at some point, I have to cut this whole bottom piece off so that it matches this lip. So what I'll do is I'll probably cut it short because I want this thing to be exact as I roll it in. And yeah, then it's gonna be pretty darn dialed. I will then be able to weld around the perimeter and up around the lip. So it's gonna be really cool. Okay, my dry fit looks really good. I mean, obviously the hood gaps aren't perfect, but I'm not exactly setting up the fenders to be perfect, but here's what we've got. We've got a nice, smooth closing hood. We've got pretty even, I mean, we might be a couple of millimeters off. Like this side looks like it's a teeny bit higher, like just by a couple, but I feel confident enough right now that I might throw a couple of welds. While this thing is all buttoned up, I might throw a couple welds like right here, just to seal this thing in. And then if I need to make a couple of minor tweaks with a hammer, you know, I keep having my reference point, which is 85 millimeters from this bolt hole until this edge right here. But I'm feeling like, I'm feeling it's pretty damn close to me. And I'm thinking we send it, you know? Then I'm gonna cut this panel out. I'm gonna see sort of how this thing lies. And then I might do the same thing where I might just throw a little welderoonie, grind this thing off, put a couple welds in here, take the fenders off and then weld the whole thing up. Then I have to start deciding where and how I'm gonna make panels, like to box everything in. But I'm feeling pretty confident that I am awfully close. I think the only other thing I haven't done yet, which I'll do right now, is I'm gonna size up the bumper. I've actually left my jack the exact same height as it was before. So I should be able to slide the jack under there, slide the bumper on, and just size it again, making sure that it all looks okay. And if it does, you know, Bob's your uncle. We're gonna start some welding. This thing is absolutely close enough for me to permanently fit it together. So the next plan is I'm gonna weld each corner so that I'm gonna measure again, make sure it's exactly 85 millimeters, it's right where it needs to be. Then I'm gonna weld each corner, take everything back off. I'm gonna grind the lower valance, the latch panel that I've been doing, so that it sits where it's supposed to with kind of the bass mouth, and I'll show you guys what that looks like. I have a couple of pieces I'll talk to you about in a little bit, but I'm gonna do those two things now and weld the top and the bottom, and then it's gonna live where it lives. There's no measure twice, cut once. There's measure 346 times, then cut or then weld. So this is like day 5 of this front latch panel, and I have to say that this front latch panel install was easily the most technically and mentally challenging install and fabrication I've ever had to do on a car ever in my life. It was really a mind F. And I gotta say, I kind of nailed it. Check this out. Check this out. So I've got it all, what do they say, planished back. I've got this welded. I've got the hole cut out. So I got a weld right here, a little tack weld here, and one here. How about this? Ready? Kadoosh! Come on now. Come on, people. Come on, look how good that is. Come on now. Look at the gaps. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. Totally feel like I nailed it. And I've got to fill these gaps in. Let's see if I can get around. I got to fill this whole gap in with metal. So I'm going to do some cardboard aided design. I'm going to pull these fenders off. Going to make some metal templates. And of course, I've got to finish this thing so it matches the curve of this fender. And then it gets welded to the end here. And then this whole middle part gets filled in. So that's what I'm going to work on now. So the move here is you make it out of cardboard, get it where you want it, and then you trace it onto your metal, and then make a metal piece. Obviously you make it a little bit bigger than you need it, so you can trim it down. This leading curve is the thing that I'm really the most concerned about. Okay, here's the piece fitted. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to weld along this seam, and then I want this edge, see this edge, to go down and then settle into this. So it's going to be this nice transition as I go down. Before I do any of that, I'm going to pull this off, give this one little trim over here, and then duplicate the piece on the other side. Here we are with the piece all in. I've got it all ground down. I think I might need to do a little bit of filler here just to make the transition smoother, but really happy with how that turned out. Gonna do the same thing on the other side. I will see you guys back when that's done. Well, as I mentioned, that was the most complicated bit of fabrication and creation that I've ever done on a car. And this video you're watching right now, I think may be the most clips I've ever shot. So if you guys are still here and watching this video, throw me a high five in the comments. I just want to say thank you so much for hanging. I'm working on what I think is a really cool little piece of merch. So I'm probably going to give a few away every month, but I'm working on it now. I will hopefully be able to reveal it in the next episode or two, but I have to get it finished first. I hope if you are watching this in the future that you are not intimidated. If you need to create something or make something cool for your car, get a welder, get a cheap welder, start tacking the stuff together. It's not as hard as you might think. Trust me, if I can do it, you definitely can do this. So next episode, I'm gonna jack the car up. I'm gonna level it so it's level this way and level this way. And we are gonna start fabricating permanent mounts for the Porsche G96 transmission and the Subaru EZ30 engine. Until then, you guys have a great week. I will talk to you soon.